really nicely. Our next talk is Geoff Hil giving a very agile with rapid threat model prototyping. And please, nobody stab him with a knife. It's already happened this week.
Okay. Yeah, I had a little bit of an incident the other night with a zombie. And that's why my hands are over here. I didn't do proper threat modeling, shall we say. So I didn't assess my issues. But nonetheless, here I am. I'm alive and well. My name is Geoff Hil, as you can see by the lovely visage right there. And to give you a quick background, I run a company called Tutomatic Sec, and so we do threat modeling and all that right there. What I'd like to do is, in the next few slides, I'm going to spend about 15 minutes talking about how we learned about the downfalls of doing it, of integrating it. What's that? Oh, okay. The downfalls and what we did about integrating Agile into our work practices using threat modeling, and then the other 15 minutes to introduce you to something called rapid threat model prototyping, which I think some of you know. Not many people, who knows. That's how I'm going to go. And then if we have any time left, then let the deluge of questions begin, or people just stare at me blankly because it is 4 o'clock. And thank you very much for making it this far, right? Okay, so don't need to talk about that. Let's carry on right to this. This is what I started off. I said, look, I wanted a way, and my team wanted a way to deal with threat modeling in an Agile environment, because probably you'll agree that when many teams did threat modeling and when they continue to do threat modeling, they did it in a waterfall type environment. And so what they did was they did all this heavy lifting in the very beginning, and then, or they throw it on some poor sap like me and say, you do the threat model, you're the security guy. Like, okay. And then I get a threat model done, and then by then the team would already run off with the project. The sprints would have been done, and that's that. So I came up with an idea, and then I talked over with the people in my group that we should look at doing threat model prototyping, which is kind of an iterative way of doing threat modeling, okay? Just like any kind of system prototyping. 4 parts to this that we talked about. And we used the structure of Agile architecture to help us out. Does anyone here know what Agile architecture, the concepts? A few people. Excellent. All right, so I'm not going to be talking completely foreign here. The first step right here is we wanted to identify business requirements that were coming into the system, like everyone does, but we wanted to tie those business requirements to security requirements, not the other way around, not the tail wagging the dog. Too many times we get out there and say we get a list of security requirements, but 250 requirements, and we say, pick one, pick several, and then match them back to the business requirements. No. What we wanted to do is we wanted to find it the other way around. That's the first step right there. So using kind of intentional architecture ideas to marry up the business side of things with our architecture side of things. Then we go into the conceptual design, which is actually then we get together with the teams, and using different ideas of emergent design, we would then get the teams together and we use security champions to help us out. We test a prototype. We have a concept called zones of trust, which is like boundaries, except we call them zones of trust. And then we revise, enhance, and repeat. And as everyone is saying today, it's like, look, threat model is a voyage. It's, you don't come to the conclusion right off the bat. It's true, you don't. 80-20 rule. Use 20% of your effort, get 80% of the way. By then you have enough information to help everybody out because they have a threat model, they have stuff they can use, and then you move on to the next iteration. Oh, we need more information? Gather that information, put it back into your threat model for the next sprint, roll it through, and then keep on doing this. And eventually you'll either get a very perfected threat model or you'll move on to the next thing that you need to. But you don't need to have a perfect threat model. A perfect threat model is done when the project is done, which is absolutely useless. As I said right here, security champions. We talk about security champions to drive the threat model. That's what I talked about just a moment ago, and I heard a lot of it being talked about in previous talks right here too. And the basic idea of security champions is that they're your eyes on the ground. They're your people who will drive the threat modeling activity locally. So my experience has been, and my team's experience has been, that with security champions, you get people who are interested. I've actually had some pretty good luck with it in all the places I've worked in. You said, hey, we're interested in getting some security champions up. You kind of sound it out. Generally, you pick the people who are more experienced, and you say, look, in addition to doing the security champion stuff, we can kind of get you out and take you to things like Threat Model Connect and everything like that, and we'll pay for it. Stick in the carrot kind of thing. And a lot of times people come forward and say, that's kind of cool. And you make them feel elite, and they'll jump to it. And then you try to get security champions in every team you have, including the non-technical teams. To give you an example, okay, I'm just going to go off on a little bit of divergence right here, but we had a situation happen in our marketing team, in one of the teams that I worked in, where the marketing team bought an off-the-shelf product. got into an off-the-shelf product. They were doing it. We had an idea where we were going to do a big push for something with a company, and the push never happened. Like the money they were supposed to get never happened. In fact, it flatlined for them. So they went through and they said, well, guys, what's going on here? We looked at the product that we were using. It was a cloud-based product. It turns out that after a bit of forensics, we found out that half the people who were in the database for the cloud-based product didn't work for the company anymore. Point number one. Point number two is, of those half of people also, half of them were administrators because marketing people don't know, it just works. So if we had known about this beforehand, if we had taken care of this beforehand, then if we had eyes on the ground of this beforehand, it would have helped us out. So that's why I say security champions in every team. The security champions would drive the threat modeling activity because there were too few of us on the ground. Generally, I think Tanya said, and it's my experience too, they say, but we got 20 people. But the company is 80,000 people. Okay, you don't have that many people covering the whole thing. So you want to make sure that you have security champions out there as your local kind of points of representative. Now let's take a look right here, and let's break down the intentional architecture into two parts. The left-hand side right here is a strategy part, that's a business part. The right-hand side, the enterprise architecture part. So let's take a look at the strategy part. And this is what I love telling people when I do the classes that I teach, is I say, okay, take a vision statement, and I want you to find threats, and I want you to find security issues in a vision statement. And everyone just kind of looks at me blankly. And I say, okay, let's walk through using Stride. So if we say, and I can't do it really that easily here, but what I do with the class, I say, and I'll ask right now, is BBC has a vision statement, which is to educate, illuminate, and entertain. Okay? So can anyone see any kind of security issues in that? Maybe not right off the bat, but if you applied Stride to it, you said, okay, what about spoofing? Are there any spoofing issues in that statement, that vision statement? Can someone tell me?
You can disguise entertainment as education, I guess?
Disguise entertainment as education? You could, okay. So what are any other spoofing issues anyone can see? Go ahead.
Malicious training.
Malicious training, like mine? Well, you're getting kind of the idea. So like another one would be tampering. Tampering with data is pretty easy because the BBC is all about data. So immediately when you say to educate, well, if I tamper with the data and I give bad education, ooh, that's not good. But also, because inform is a big one, and BBC is probably one of the most trusted news sources out there, if I tamper with that data, that's bad. Now you get the idea. So I can go through and I can say, when I talk to the classes, I can pick each one of these things. I can say vision. Okay, the mission statements are a series of them go into the vision. And then you say, well, then we set the goals based upon the mission statements and so on. We break it all the way down. So now the security people and the other people have an idea of what security lies with the business ideas of the company. Quick setup right there. Usually you can do it in a couple hours at most. And you have an idea of what security issues lay out there from a broad perspective, which then allows you to feed into the next side, which is the enterprise architecture side, which is, if you look right here, people, process, and technology feeds into everything right here in enterprise architecture, plus, okay, policies that drive the company, what company functions are, so do you have a strong security function or not? Do you need to build one up? What information gets passed into the company? How do you go about processing that information? All of this feeds into the architecture side, which will then consume that security side. And the security coming from the business side, right there. So business information coming in, we figure out what the security is on that. We can then feed that into the architecture side of things, and now we're ready to do threat modeling. So threat modeling, I don't know if anyone's seen this, agile modeling right here. It's a number of different steps that happen. The ones in the solid ovals are actual activities, and the dashed ovals are things you should be doing, not necessary activities. For example, the requirements envisioning is what I was telling you about the business side of things. I get a set of business requirements or epics or whatever like that, and I try to figure out what the security is from that by asking some simple questions. We then go into our initial architectural envisioning, which is the actual top-level threat models, epic-level threat models, with the information you get fed into it. Then we make sure that we are feeding back to our stakeholders, our bosses, fellow developers who are stakeholders, other people in the company who are interested in this. These are all stakeholders. We then prioritize what we need to do here. We do just enough that we need to, 80-20 rule, and we make sure that all this is packed into a threat model, which is generally aligned very tightly with our system diagrams or our architectural diagrams, our context diagrams, our basic design of the system. we want to make sure that that's tightly coupled. Because then if the design changes, then we'll see a difference with the threat model in general. So the next part right here is in-sprint activities. We have 3 in-sprint activities we generally talked about. Now, the test-driven design isn't necessarily test-driven design as you think about it. It's just using tests that come from a threat model, okay? The 3 steps right here, iteration modeling or sprint level modeling, is at the beginning of each sprint. You're going to take either that the higher level model or a section of it, and the teams then will discuss. We'll say, okay, is this model reflect what we're actually doing for the next sprint or the next few sprints? And we do changes upon it. Might take hours, might take minutes, but we were doing a modification right there. We then push back the threats and we say, okay, we're going to, during this sprint right here, we're going to see, can we do some tests on this to make sure that what we're doing isn't going to come up, that we put the proper protections in. And then finally, we do a bit of model storming in case we see any kind of if-then analysis, or we say, okay, look, we want to do spike on something, we have an idea. We say, okay, well, you know what? Let's say that we want to put SFTP endpoints in instead of FTP endpoints. Okay, let's spike it. And that's a kind of model storming idea right there. Then what we do is, these things right down here, like this document continues a bit, the look-ahead modeling and the multiple models right here is all about the what-if analysis. That's the great thing about threat modeling is I can create a number of different threat models, and the team and I can discuss what each of the different outcomes are, multiple outcomes, and then you just dump the outcomes. And I'm not talking about doing full models each time, because the team is going to understand from the iteration modeling what section or what part of the large epic level model they're going to take. And they're going to say, well, yeah, you know what? We don't need that much. We can just do a list. Or we actually have to do a full-blown model for this. But we're going to understand. I'm leaving it up to the team, being the domain level knowledge experts. I'm just a security guy. I'm here to help you guys out. And that's the whole idea of the marrying between the two of them. Is the team drives, along with the help of the security champion, the team drives this and drives this activity. So this is just another way of looking at it. The initial requirements envisioning, that's the business level stuff, where we map up the business level stuff, and we extract out the security requirements that we need, and we're going to feed that into the architectural envisioning right here. The architectural envisioning is going to give us an epic level threat model, which we can take that epic level threat model and we can slice it as we go into each of the different sprints, right down here. So the sprint, the iteration modeling will happen on a certain sprint level threat model. Do we need to do that much? Not. It's the team makes a decision, and the team does it with the idea of both, supposedly with an SME if you're along, or with the security champion. The security champion drives the activity. Then they do some testing, test-driven development, test-driven design. Any changes right there, they want to spike anything, they do a storming session, which will take minutes. That's a kind of general idea that you want to do with taking care of it. So you want to overlay it into actually what the activities that the teams are doing, and then you rotate through. The main thing right here is that security champions should be driving this activity. SMEs will be out there helping out, but there aren't many of us down on the ground. So we want our security champions to get in there and be involved and have a pretty good idea of it. So are there any questions? I think I've breezed through that pretty quickly, haven't I? 15 minutes, right on the nose. All right, now we go on to the second thing is, what is RTMP? RTMP is Rapid Threat Model Prototyping, and it is a way that we can speed up manually the process of doing the threat modeling when we're inside the processes right there. It takes the idea of defense in depth, right here. It's funny, modern defense in depth. Michael, I'm going to defer to you because when you talked about Okinawa, I'm like, oh yes, because I actually bring in history into my teachings, and I talk about castles, ancient castles and everything like that. And I was like, oh great, and then you talk about that, that's fantastic. Because I talk about that for older defense in depth, of why they fail and everything like that. So that's just kind of a lead into that. So the things that we want to do is we want to make sure during RTMP is identify what I call the nodes, which are the points of execution or points where the data hits the disk or does something. And I want to identify those in any kind of model that we're talking about. Afterwards, then, we want to identify the flows. And we want to do it based upon the flow of request as opposed to response. Why is that? I mean, everyone here probably knows that. It's because the response is data, but the request is where the damage happens. That's where I can actually do my number. So if we identify that, we identify the request to response, we identify the flows within a certain design right here, then we can go through the zones of trust. And the zones of trust is it's a pretty straightforward concept. Basically what it is I break down everything right here and I say each of these things right here is going to sit within a relative, zone of trust. It's how much trust do you place on that particular object inside of this design. So I put arbitrarily 0 to 9, which works, and it's relative to each one of the threat models, first of all. It's not an absolute. But 0, let's see if I do this right here. Yes, 0 is not in control of the system. It's outside of your control. So it's any kind of, in this particular case, is customer service, and admin user. To me, they're all outside of my control. They're zeros. They're calling into the system, they're generally executing, they're calling off the system and kicking some process off. In this particular case right here, customers go through and they either get to the product API or they do some kind of updating or adding to the customer identity store. Down here, customer service does some kind of a proxy in there to act like a customer to the product API, and then admin user, which is probably the most dangerous. We know that, but it is directly to the heart of things and directly to the heart of the admin identity store. So once we get the numbers down, the zones of trust, we can then do what's called zone math. And that's the heart of the whole thing. Zone math applies stride elements really quickly. Zones of trust will take you a little bit of time in a complex table like this, a complex diagram. The zone math is just zone math. Okay, once I get the numbers down there, I have 6 different rules. First rule is spoofing. It's done on the target node, and it's from not in control of the system to any other. So in this particular case, these 3 things right here, not in control of the system, they're calling into these 3 boundary elements. Therefore, I'm going to put a spoofing designation, S designation on that. It means that is the highest probability of finding spoofing in this diagram. It doesn't mean that you couldn't find spoofing anywhere else. It means if I'm going to go first, I'm going to look there. The second thing is tampering. And tampering is going to happen on any flow where it's less critical to more critical. The idea is that I can tamper with the data, and generally if I'm going from a less critical area to a more critical area, I might have a situation where I can actually do some damage. So in this particular case right here, you see all the different numbers that I put down. There's tampering everywhere. It then basically forces the team to go through, like this is a complex one, but it basically says the team's not going to need to go through, you're going to need to assess each one of these flows on what happens. The third rule is for repudiation. And, the standard designation for repudiation is non-repudiation, isn't it? And I never liked that. It's like, try telling a bunch of people who are not security practitioners, and they say, what's the opposite of repudiation? You're like, non-repudiation. Next question, please. And it doesn't really work. So it actually, if you think about it, it is the mismatching of spoofing and tampering before it. Because either I'm spoofing an identity or I'm tampering with some kind of data to cover my tracks. So repudiation actually is a combination of that pattern right there. So if I can find that pattern inside of here, then I've got a repudiation issue inside. And I then apply the R. If I see either spoofing plus tampering or tampering plus spoofing, I apply it to the target node, and now I have my high probability of tampering happening. Information disclosure is the mirror image in many ways of tampering, because that's more critical to less critical. It means I'm potentially spilling data. And at that point in time, it's like, okay, then I want to make sure that I'm looking at it. The reason I say it's a mirror image in many ways is because a lot of times when I propose mitigations for a tampering or for an information disclosure, it usually works for the obverse. Like that TLS, for example, it's going to work for both of them. Not always, but a lot of times that happens. So you want to make sure that that's still unique. You want to figure that out. For example, in this case right here, the admin identity store to the user identity store, that's a potential information disclosure going from the more to the less. We put an eye on that right there. Denial of service is on the target node and flow, because it's not only are you hitting an endpoint with potentially excess or malicious information, but you're also pumping in data in there potentially. So that's why we want to take a look at both the data flows in there and the target node in there. So you have denial of service happening from outside, not in control of the system, to any other in the system. And the reason I say any other is you don't necessarily have boundary elements everywhere. I found a number of different designs where somebody says, oh yeah, well, I think somebody said it earlier on when they said, oh yeah, we've got a management console right here, a management endpoint right here. You call into that. Well, what's that management endpoint? Oh, we'll make that a 4 or 5. And then you have someone outside calling into it like, whoa, okay. So you want to make note of that right there on the design. And then finally we have elevation of privilege. And elevation of privilege is on the target node, from less critical to more critical. Again, because potentially you're calling from a less critical area or an area which has fewer permissions set to a higher area, and then therefore you put it around on the different nodes there. So you're going to find it all throughout the system again, on elevation of privilege issues. So that's just applying stride. And we have about 5 minutes left. So the applying stride is probably the easiest part because that's just doing the numbers right here. What we do afterwards is I teach to take and to map stride to the OWASP Top 10 2021, or you can do it to the CWE. Now CWE, I can indirectly do it to OWASP Top 10 2021, because it's already done in there. But if we do it right here, that means if I map that out, and I can say, spoofing. Spoofing is A7, identification and authentication failures. And then if I go to it, then I can find a whole bunch of different out-of-the-box prevention, which then I can apply. And after a bit, when people get fast enough about this, they know automatically what to pick. And they get pretty good about it. And that's where it speeds up everything, because it takes away the analysis paralysis that many teams have. And they say, like, well, I don't know what to do. We're going to put in defensive measures. You say, well, here you go. It's right there, and actually it's pointed out for you to help you out. And so as teams get better about it, then they will understand, for example, where MFA goes in, that kind of thing. And then you'll find them smoothly going through this a lot more. They can also, some of the teams I've taught, instead of putting in the OWASP Top 10, they put in their own security frameworks in there, and they do the mapping from stride to that. So that is it. I could go through it pretty fast. I have about 6 minutes left for any questions, or is everyone stunned to silence? I'm opening the floor up. No. No.
No. I'll do it.
Well, that was harsh, Geoff.
I know, sorry.
That was cool. Thank you for the presentation. It was really awesome. So, and what about the scaling?
Scaling?
Yeah.
So
how does this approach scale across the teams? So,
well, if you're asking about the size of the teams, I mean, generally we're between 5 to 7 people. It's any development team that can do it. Fewer than 3 people, it's difficult. Because then you get down to the whole situation where one person ends up doing the threat model, and then it doesn't scale at all. So you want it to be a team activity. Is that what you're asking?
no, let me paraphrase.
Oh, sorry.
So you have shown that in one sprint, you are able to threat model what is developed within the sprint.
Mm-hmm.
So I assume that you have development team which does development, plus some security guy who does threat modeling within the sprint. Is that correct?
No, what it is a collaborative exercise. So I make sure when we go in, we make sure we target out and we get people who are willing to become security champions, and we skill them up in this, in rapid threat model prototyping.
Okay.
Once we do that, then they become almost the orchestrator. They're like the conductor, and we'll initially go in with them, but we don't scale it. But initially we'll go in with them, and then we'll help them to direct the activity and encourage the teams to work through with them. Okay. And then once we get the teams to understand, to me, it serves many purposes. Purpose number one is that we're going to raise the level of everybody without having to send them out a lot on the course. Eventually, they're not dumb people, and eventually they'll start understanding all the patterns that are out there, and they'll know which patterns work and which don't. And then they'll turn around and start thinking, Tanya, were you the one who's talking about that? They're all hackers at heart. Yeah, and it's true. They'll find certain patterns and everything like that, and somebody will say, yeah, actually, have you thought about using this? I'm like, that's pretty good. So then you allow them to then come back with their own patterns. And then that's where the true power comes out. So once you start getting that training the trainer kind of thing by using the security champions.
That perfectly answers.
It will spike though. It will spike. So your initial training will go up like this, and then it kind of come off like that. And eventually the security champion will be spending a couple hours a week, doing that specifically.
That's cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Michael, I should have done a more controversial set of topics here.
So I thought this was really cool because it was a really good way to teach people stride. Here's a systematic way. If you've never seen this, this is you can kind of just walk through. Is there a similar framework and thought for the other threat modeling, the PASAs, the dreads, all that kind of stuff?
Okay. Good question. Okay, so I dropped dread years ago. Yeah. I couldn't get it to work.
Yeah, I struggle with the other ones as well. Yeah. That's honestly for me to.
Well, initially I tried to realize okay, scale of 1 to 10. How am I going to how do I differentiate between 8 and 9? And then it's just so. Then I said, okay, I'll make it binary, And then that didn't work because nobody understood what I was talking about. Most of the guys looked at me and said, what the hell are you talking about? I'm like, all right. And I just chucked it out. And I said, it's not helping me. So get it out of the way. Now, Linden, I want to do something with, and I've thought about it. And that's why I contacted you, because I thought this would be great to overlay. And in fact, I got beaten to the punch, and there is a fork of the open source that I've done here with a company, whom I'm not allowed to name, has actually done this and put into practice on the rapid threat model prototyping. Is they put privacy issues into each one of the things. I thought that's really cool. So to answer your question, it is out there. I just haven't done anything on it. So I'm, it's let this open source thing be on its own kind of thing. And no, I haven't done it with Trike or anything like that.
So just any of them. Got it. Fair.
I promise, not controversial.
Okay.
More of an experience. I mean, what I see based on my career is when organizations move to Agile. Yes, there are still organizations which are moving to Agile,
Yep.
which are not rooted in, where Agile is not rooted. The organization itself is already quite kind of hammered by this new concept of Agile, where they need to apply this. Now you come and put the security layer on top of that. Is there a good kind of, maybe from experience, way to introduce both of that with the security champions walking in with the Agile?
Yeah.
Should it come after? Should it come at once? Is there a good experience that you can share?
I don't hammer them with a full RTMP originally. When I went through a couple of rollouts actually where the companies went through this. Initially what I did is I just taught them Stride. And I said, okay, just understand what Stride is and just we'll converse about it, that's all. And it is more like of an alert as opposed to I shall hold you to this. And then what I did was initially I got in and I picked a few people who seemed really keen and wanted to talk to me. And I said, okay, why don't you join up with me and we'll begin an informal security group, which we then ultimately formalized. But I did it kind of by inches. So I went out there and I got them on board. And once I got them to become rabid fanatics, then I could turn them around. Then they went through and then they found other people. That was the way that I did it. I tried doing it the other way by getting the people at the top. And they said exactly the same thing as you. Is they said, oh, well, we've already got all these different things rolling out. We can't possibly do the security stuff. And I said, all right, fine. So I created something in my head called guerrilla threat modeling. Where I kind of went underneath. It's like, are you doing threat modeling? No, not at all. No, no, what's that? It's not a data flow diagram, not at all. That kind of thing. So that's kind of what I did. So.
Just do it.
What's that?
Just do it.
Just do it. Yeah. Well, what was it that? I know the quote is older than who's the guy who did Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. says something like, when somebody tells you not to do something, you just smile and nod and just do the fucking thing anyways.
So I actually have an answer to your question about having used it on a team. Very new to threat modeling. I haven't really done a whole heck of a lot, but I did use it with a small team when they were bringing in some AWS authentication for what was traditionally not an AWS app, and it was just for that little module, and we ran through the exercise of identifying from 0 to 10, and that worked really well. Now, unfortunately, I didn't do any sort of follow-ups because it was all kind of all over the place, but I did follow up with them a little later, and they said, yeah, no, that was great, and we actually identified that we don't need a lot of that stuff, and so they wound up going a different direction anyway. So it found that it worked. I can't wait to try it again, but yeah.
I found that and by doing this thing, the minute I put numbers to the different zones, and instead of asking them to put dashed lines around things, once I told them to quantify stuff, well, they're engineers, and they said, oh, we can do that. And what I said to them, I said, instead of trying to think of it from a security perspective, because you're not security people, if I were to look at this particular object, whatever it is, this particular node, and if I were to take it offline, how bad would that be? Oh, okay, so from a functional perspective, they could answer pretty easily because they're the domain experts, and that's what I wanted to make sure, is that they could do it in addition to just a security person.
Yeah.
Oh, no, hey, listen, if we're talking about, what you said beforehand, it's like...
I almost was interested in some automation. I was, from your presentation, it was great, but I was wondering, from my understanding, for the big products that where infrastructure or components are not changing very often, this will work very, very good. But if in Agile, when the small changes
microservices or whatever,
features adding. Let's say today they changed cipher.
Yeah.
Like in encryption, right? How your thread model or automation around it will catch those small changes. Because
So
we don't want to go to the full thread modeling just because small changes were introduced on a daily basis or 100 times per day in most cases.
that's where our iteration modeling step comes in. So when you have a small change, like an iterative change, that'll go into the discussion that the team members will have with the security champion. Sometimes the security champion will pull the SME in, and they'll say, look, we've got these things out here, and the security champion might say, hey, it doesn't look like we have any severe architectural changes here. What do you think? And then the team will discuss it, and they'll say, well, you're right. We don't really have a major architectural change. We can do a point change to it. We don't have to go through the whole step of doing another threat model to it.
But
The whole
I understand, but what will trigger in your experience the full architecture model?
I don't have any hard and fast rule for that. It's up to the teams.
Okay.
The teams know.
It's not that that's logic inside your process.
No,
Somehow
and
will automatically will know.
no, and I purposely did that because I ran into too many edge cases when we tried to put a hard and fast, like, if this number of nodes change and you go in all in, and I ran into too many problems, and so I said, look, leave it up to the teams. The teams know best. The teams are the ones who should drive, just like they drive currently in any agile process. They drive whatever their iterations are. So let the teams drive this too. Just give them the tools and the education to do it.
It occurs to me, if I might ask a question, even though we're supposed to be done now. What do you do? I mean, maybe it's different where you do Agile, but in ideal Agile, a team could take their design stuff in a lot of different ways. So some might decide to take all their design work up front. Others might decide to, test-driven design or code-driven design and take it, bit by bit. Does this still work with someone who doesn't have a design section, but who takes their design in incremental ways based on what they're learning while they're
Can I say, yes, it does. It does because we went up and successfully rolled this out to a bank up in Sweden. And the funniest thing about that was when the guy was drawing out at one point, he's like, gee, I've never actually written this out. I've never actually put this out beforehand. But what we did, we encouraged them to draw out what they wanted to draw out. And then you say everything else you abstract away. Almost, it's almost like in development, you say, okay, we're just going to put a stub on that. And then you treat the stub as being a negative, and then you work around that. And then that way it allows you, then you revisit it next time, you say, okay, look, we're going to drill into that stub. Like that.
Yeah. So you can take it incrementally, in bits and pieces as you need it.
But if you start off, and to your point, if you start off really high, it's not super helpful. It'll be okay to start off the conversation, but you're not going to get specific advice out of it. Potentially, you'll get discussions. I mean, to me, and I think hopefully everyone agrees right here. To me, threat models are a discussion starter. They should provoke discussion and get the people talking. Now, I should not come up with a threat model and say, like, you got to do this, because they need to come to that conclusion.
If you didn't hear anything else today useful, can you repeat that, please, Geoff?
Threat models should be a conversation starter.
Yeah, and I've heard Isar say that, I've heard Chris say that, I've heard Adam say that, you've probably heard me say that. So,
it doesn't, exactly. It doesn't work the other way around, because if you get in there and you say, thou shalt, too many times, again, how many, show of hands from people where some poor sap ends up doing the threat model, and then by the time they get done with the threat model, the project's galloped away and finished and it's out in production. Yeah, exactly.
I'm very against point in time.
And it drives me crazy.
Especially in Agile.
Yeah.
Now, of course, hardware is software that's way more expensive and lengthy to compile. So that's an Intel joke, by the way. But their waterfall makes a lot more sense. So, it's different.
You can do this with waterfall. It's
sure,
you just slow down the steps.
We have to close it because we're getting there at the end. Thank you, Geoff.
There we go. Thank you.